If you were a transparent person, what would you most like to do? This next man, he did what all men want to do the most. Anthony, the main character, is a scientist. He likes to do scientific research in his spare time. He enjoys watching his female neighbor across the street while he works, but every time he is prompted to pay for the window. This makes Anthony itchy. After thinking about it, he decided to work on an invisibility potion to satisfy his desire. It wasn't long before the invisibility potion was developed. The first experiments were conducted on live animals. The potion successfully rendered the animals invisible. Under normal circumstances, their presence would not be detected. But how to make the animals visible again was a problem. Anthony kept trying day and night, but the results were still not satisfactory. Distraught, he suddenly noticed something. It was the return of his female neighbor from across the street. As is his custom, it was his time to relax. But at the crucial moment, he was blocked by the pay window. That was the moment of truth. He seems to have thought of something. After testing, the formula for the manifestation potion was stable. The potion was soon made. The next step was to experiment with the invisible gorilla. As the potion is injected into the blood vessels, it begins to take shape. Then came the heart, muscle, bone and skin. Within minutes, the gorilla had successfully regained its original shape. The success of this experiment was very exciting for the team, for it represented glory and wealth. But Anthony didn't report it to his superiors. He had plans for the invisibility potion. On this day, he defied the rules of the organization. He injected himself with the invisibility potion. It didn't take long for his body to undergo a miraculous transformation. He gradually turned into a pile of white bones. Finally, he disappeared. It was a magical potion. The man's body began to change strangely after he injected it. In no time at all, he was a pile of white bones. He disappeared completely from the lab. Thus Anthony became the world's first invisible man. And to ensure Anthony's safety, he will be observed in the laboratory for 3 days. He will be tested on all physical parameters. A thermal imaging camera is also provided to facilitate observation. Colleagues take turns keeping watch to prevent accidents. But in the middle of the night, Anthony slipped out. He saw the sleeping short-haired girl. He called out to her twice. When she didn't move, Anthony began to ruffle her hair and just then the girl woke up. She saw that Anthony had just returned to bed. He thought he must have had something to do with it. The next morning he told his colleague about the situation, but Anthony said he had only got up to have a cup of coffee. With the appearance of Anthony, the invisible man, the female colleagues always felt that something was following them. Even when they went to the toilet, they had to use the thermal imaging camera to see if they were comfortable. This made them uncomfortable. Every now and then they would say something bad about Anthony, but what they didn't know was that Anthony was sitting in the chair. It was Anthony's last night of invisibility. He was going to have a different kind of fun with his ex-girlfriend, but he was turned down. Day 2 was the day Anthony was restored. With the injection of a dangerous drug, his heart began to move, and as he was about to succeed, Anthony disappeared back into white bone. The experiment had failed. To facilitate his normal life, the team prepared a rubber jacket for him. The eyes and mouth were cut out with scissors, and a pair of sunglasses. He was so cool, but the repetitive experiments on his appearance were too much for Anthony. Fed up with being used as a guinea pig, one day he slipped out of the lab. He got into his sports car. It was a great feeling to come back from the dead. He returned home. Anthony spotted his female neighbor across the street again. This time he didn't want to be blocked by a pay window. He wanted to use his invisibility to be a real man, so he rang his neighbor's doorbell. This is an invisible man. He actually sneaks into his female neighbor's room. And then, it was Anthony, the invisible man who snuck out of the lab. A colleague who sensed something was wrong went to Anthony's house, only to find a rubber jacket that had been taken off. To prevent accidents, the team were equipped with anesthetic guns. But that's when Anthony returned to the lab. He felt that the others were trying to get at him. This made him very angry. He threw the experimental animals around. He even prepared to take revenge on his ex-girlfriend Andy. Noticing this, Andy pulled a flyer and covered it. But there was nothing. Strange things happen all the time. The surveillance showed that Anthony never left. But just as Andy felt for the bed, there was no one there. This made them sure it was Anthony all along. Then John and Andy went to their superiors. They reported Anthony, the invisible man's misdeeds. But just as they were about to call the military for help, only to find that the phone lines were down, the old man went out to check. Anthony was pushed straight into the pool. He was dragged into the water and sent to his lunchbox. There was no trace of the whole thing. Andy, who hadn't heard from him, tried to call, but couldn't get through. By the time he was ready to leave the lab, the access code was no longer valid. It turned out that Anthony, obsessed with stealth, didn't want to get caught. He had cut off all internet access to the outside world. He kept the access codes to himself. He wanted to silence all those who knew. By now, the group had realized what Anthony was up to. They grabbed their gear and decided to fight back. The black girl, who had fallen behind, was ambushed by Anthony, and then they were perfectly set up to be left alone. They were killed one by Anthony. Just as Anthony the Invisible Man was about to leave, Andy arrives with a flamethrower. Anthony didn't die after the flames. He gradually faded into invisibility. The clever Andy triggered the water jet. Anthony emerged from the water, but Andy was still knocked to the ground. Luckily, John arrived just in time. A blow to Anthony, the Invisible Man. Only 2 people left the lab alive. If you had the power of invisibility, what would you use it for?